It's a pleasure to have the chance to intervene with you today, with you, specialist in the fight against corruption, and I'm very happy to share some of the work I've done over the last years. Quickly to remind my position, I'm a senior lecturer at the University of Rennes in France, and before that, I've been working in a private research field in Paris at the IRIS Institute, who have been dealing with geopolitical issues and especially the link with international sports governance, sports integrity, especially since 2010, when we had a number of investigations, number of policy developments at national and international level to counter the growing number of cases of scandals into sports at the various levels. I will go into that later on today. And then I conducted a PhD at the University of Lausanne, specifically on the subject of sports whistleblowers at international level and how international sports organizations can use information coming from whistleblowers to prevent, detect, and sanction various forms of sports corruption. Since 2 years now, I'm at the University of Rennes, still working on sports integrity, regulation of sports, and the phenomenon of sports corruption and sports manipulation linked to betting in particular. So, as you will see today and tomorrow, the subject of sports corruption is quite wide. So I'll go quite deeply into the subject this morning in just over 45 minutes to present rapidly the main forms of sports corruption that we can see today that can be embodied in a number of cases, as we have seen in the media for the last years. I'm sure you know many of the cases we'll mention. Then I will present two applicable norms that can be used by states, but also private sports organizations to prevent, detect, and sanction sports corruption, mainly the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and the Council of Europe Macron Convention on the Manipulation of Sports Competition. And I will finish with quite a rapid view as well on the role of and the protection of the whistleblowers in sports. It was the subject of my doctoral research, but as you will see, it's a specific subject within sports. It's a very sensitive aspect, as we'll see in other sensitive sectors in our states. So. As Ramina said, if you have any question, please at the end, I will make sure that we have some time for discussion. You guys are specialists as much than me on the subject, so I'm very eager to learn about your views and your questions, your opinions, your experience on this complex and rich subject. Thank you very much in advance. So I will start with a rapid typology of sports corruption. And for that, there are many typologies available, and we have many forms of abuse of power within the world of sports, within different levels, local levels, national, international levels. So I chose to really focus on three key forms of abuse of power within sports. The first one is competition manipulation, especially linked to betting, the institutional corruption within the sports organizations, and then a third, the criminal infiltration and control of sports bodies. In particular, I invite you to go visit this global report on sports corruption that has been produced by the UNODC 3 years ago. It's a quite extensive publication with many cases, many examples, many good practices in fighting corruption. And of course, for this typology, I took some examples from this report. So let's start with the competition manipulation. This is, you have heard about it over the last 15 years now, especially since the development of online betting. We have seen quite an explosion of the cases, of the rumors, scandals, of arrangements, match fixing within many types of sports competition. The Council of Europe Convention that we'll mention later on proposes a definition of competition manipulation. You can see it here. It's the arrangement, act or omission aimed at an improper alteration of the result or the course of a sports competition in order to remove all or part of the unpredictable nature of this competition. So it's quite an extensive definition, because today even forms of doping can be seen as an improper alteration of the result of a sports competition. But as I said, the Secretariat of the Council of Europe invites parties to really focus on forms of corruption linked to betting and also linked to sporting reasons. As you see on the little picture on the bottom left, cricket, the earliest forms of cricket in the 17th century in the UK, is one of the most ancient modern sports. And the rules of cricket have been written because at the time, 400 years ago, we had many cases of conflicts within bookmakers, bettors, that were betting around cricket matches. And because the rules were not written, we had a lot of conflicts at that time between them. So the rules were written because of betting. So you can see that it's quite an old subject for sports. In 1919 in the US, the final of the national NBA championship was fixed. A number of players from the Chicago White Sox team took bribes to voluntarily lose the final of the NBA. So you can imagine not the NBA, sorry, the baseball championship. So you can imagine the scandal in the US. It was more than 100 years ago. So again, you can see that it's quite an old phenomenon. But as I've said, it's mainly over the last 20 years that we have seen a number of cases in every major disciplines. In every country today, we have seen some rumors or scandals of corruption. And I put some images on the bottom right of two darts player, and even in darts, in snooker, and in winter sports, we have seen cases of manipulation at a high level competition or bottom level competition. It's quite a common phenomenon now, and I'm sure that in your respective countries you have also had some cases in Europe. The richness of the sports sector, the fact that it's very much mediatized, and makes it available for many bettors worldwide, especially in Asia, where there's a strong betting culture and where all the main betting operators, online betting operators, are based. So the European competitions have been very vulnerable to many forms of manipulation. So today, no sports, no country can say to be immune to this tsunami style phenomenon of betting related manipulation. I put one example just to show you the complexity of this phenomenon. In 2010 and 2011 and 12, a number of matches of the Italian first and second division of football, so quite a respectable the football championship, national championship, were fixed by a complex network of organized crime. The finances were coming from Southeast Asia. The money was channeled via airplane, just physical cash that was given to a number of organized crime networks in Italy and in the Balkans. And the Balkan networks in Italy and the Italian mafia as well were involved in bribing a number of players in the first and second championship at national level. And so once the games were fixed, we had one bribe of 200,000 euros for a Lazio Roma player. So you can imagine just one bribe to one defender was 200,000 euros. So you can imagine the extensive nature and the money behind such case of match fixing. Um, but once the game was fixed, the bets were placed in a number of online and offline bookmakers in Asia, illegal bookmakers. And then the money was laundered through a Panama company in particular. And then the money was coming back either through Asia or to Europe to finance more bribery and to more fixes. So you can see that in such a case, the law enforcement at national level have a really difficulties to detect and to sanction, to investigate. As you can see, more than 10 jurisdictions are concerned by just this network, and it was only part of the global landscape of fixing. that is really much prevalent, as I said, in modern sports today. Why is betting related fixing so developed now in sports? I see two main risk factors. The first one is that it's relatively, I insist on the relatively, easy to manipulate any type of competition. And I really mention any type of competition, just mentioning the case of tennis, where of course we know about the major Grand Slam tournaments where you have a huge prize money, where the players know about such types are educated. I mean, they are sensibilized. They know about the threats, and they know that they have a better career than the low-ranked players. So they know that they have much to lose if they accept some bribes and fix some games. But in many tournaments of tennis, the prize money is very low. The players have only a few years of career, and they can make much more money through fixing games and only fixing parts of the game. The second set or the first game of the third set, just or the even 1 point of one game can be fixed today thanks to online live betting. So of course, it's quite easy, relatively easy for a criminal to go and access. You can see on the bottom right one official tournament. Anyone can go alongside the tennis court and access the players. So if you have money, if you know how to approach them, if you can also threaten them, it happens a lot. It's quite easy to access sports competition. I take the example of tennis, but as you can imagine, today on the betting market, you have the second division of basketball in Sweden. You have the Paraguay volleyball championships. Many competitions are targeted: male competition, female competition, minor competitions involving minor players. So again, just to show you the vulnerability of the sports world today to this match fixing phenomenon. But the second risk factor I've already mentioned, in fact, is the fact that today you can bet on any competition you want. Today, from your computer that you are using right now, you can very easily access especially the Asian market or parts as well of the European markets, where you can bet on any type of competition, amateur competitions, as I said, last time I saw that the fifth French football division, and this is the fifth French football division, I have a friend who plays there, is proposed on the Asian market today. And it's not only types of disciplines, it's also friendly games. It's also the fact that you can bet on the halftime results, you can bet on the number of corner kicks in football. You can bet on many, as we say, negative events that can easily be bribed. For example, the fact that the next yellow card will be for this team or this team in a handball game or football game. This can be easily manipulated. So this also explains the availability of the sports betting market today. The fact that the whole spectrum of sports competitions are proposed on the betting market makes it quite easy for organized crime to target one discipline, one team that is quite weak, vulnerable because they have some, let's say, financial problems, because they have poor governance issues. Well, you can easily go to the players that are unhappy with their management, or they don't have the salaries paid on time, propose them a 6 month salary just to fix one or two games. So the betting explosion, the online betting explosion over the last years, is another explanation of the match fixing tsunami that has been invading sports in many different level of the competitions. I'm sorry, I'm going quite quick, but we can come back to that later on. The second type of corruption we can see, I wanted to mention, is concerning the sports institutions. Because of course, sports institutions are quite small. Very often, there are small associations where decisions are taken by only a small number of people that are quite vulnerable to external approaches. They decide on many important aspects: the awarding of hosting rights of Olympic Games, for example, of World Cups, World Championships. They decide on sponsorship or broadcasting rights, very lucrative contracts. They also have a key power in the nomination of some officials in key positions. For example, to become an IOC member, individual member, it's of course a position and a decision that has many political, economic implications. So it makes you more vulnerable to criminal, illegal approaches. But also the creation of new competitions in this country or this country, some disciplinary rulings, as you have seen over the last days, the doping offense of a Russian skater that you remember 2 years ago in the Beijing Winter Olympics. Some disciplinary rulings by sports institutions carry a lot of political weight. So of course you can also be vulnerable to forms of approaches. Many other examples of decisions within sports organizations that can be targeted by external corruptors. I just wanted to mention two examples that you also, of course, may remember. The FIFA Gate in 2015, when the FBI conducted an investigation in a number of contract awardings within FIFA and made some arrests, historical arrests, because it has been the first time and the only time right now that FIFA which is suspected of carrying some illegal activities for the last decades. So FIFA has been targeted in 2015 by this FBI investigation. And of course, it served as a wake-up call on the situation of the governance and the integrity of international sports organizations. I also wanted to mention the image on the bottom right, the former president of the International Athletics Federation, who was bribed by Russian officials to allow doped athletes to compete into athletic championships. He was also condemned by a French investigation in threatening athletes and also extorting money from them so that their doping tests are not revealed. He was arrested. He was not arrested. He was protected in Senegal, and he died just before his judgment, the trial in France, which condemned him for jail for his wide-ranging corruption practices at the International Athletics Institution. Just two cases, but I'm sure that at national levels as well, you hear about conflicts of interest, bribery into sports international organization or national organizations. I see three risk factors behind institutional corruption and the fact that it has developed again over the last years. The fact that today sports competition, sports activities carry a lot of, as I said, political, geopolitical, and economic weight, interest. So that's why such institutions have been targeted by such pressures, and for some of them have accepted some bribery, some influence to change, to alter their decision-making processes. But I also want to insist on the fact that such federations at national levels too are quite weak in front of such pressures, because they, as I said, there are associations, there are a very limited number of human resources inside, technological capacities to detect corruption. So of course, it makes it quite easy for external influencer to come and target them. Also, in the third risk factor I could mention is the lack of regulation today. Sometimes at national level, the ministries in charge of sports conduct forms of regulation. You still have the public sector that can control and regulate the activities of sports organizations at national level. But at international level, such regulation is lacking. As you may know, most international sports organizations are based in Switzerland, where the regulation over international sports has been very limited over the last decades. There is no international convention on the sports affairs of the decision making of the awarding of Olympic Games rights or World Cup or championships. There is no scrutiny from the public sector over international sports organizations that are very autonomous from such regulation. So that makes them as well vulnerable to forms of corruption. And the last in the typology of sports corruption I wanted to mention is the fact that it can be linked to, of course, manipulation or institutional corruption cases. But the fact that today clubs, teams, federations, but even sometimes ministries in charge of sports, as we have seen in a number of cases, can be targeted by external influencer and be used uh, for organized crime to have control, direct or indirect control over the sports activities. And when you control a club or a team or a federation, it gives you an access to many avenues of money laundering, human trafficking in the transfers of football players, for example, or the human trafficking to um, prepare for Olympic Games or World Cups, as we have seen in the case of Qatar 2022. Of course, when you control a club, you can also easily manipulate games and make a lot of money out of the betting market. You can also collude in the preparation of sports competitions or the construction of stadiums, I don't know, swimming pools. Many uh, Olympic Games today or major championships involve a lot of specialized infrastructure, and it's really costly, expensive. And in the contracts, you can easily collude, proceed into money laundering techniques, strategies. So again, the control of sports give you access to many illegal activities. So that's why in many countries, many sports entities have been influenced or are influenced by organized crime. The last aspect is that when you're coming from the illegal sector, or even when you have a suspicious profile, controlling a club, controlling a federation, makes you give you access to many politicians, and also it gives you access to the media. When you are president of a very famous football team, for example, in Europe or in outside of Europe, it gives you a very positive, more positive image than if you're just a businessman or if you are coming from the illegal sector. So again, we undervalue, I think, the image laundering that has been sought by many organized crime profiles when they want to control a club or a team. It makes you very, very popular to be active and to finance the sports world. And just to conclude on this typology, I'm sorry for this slide, very barbaric with many notions, but I wanted to highlight all the factors that makes sports corruption very specific, because many times I hear that, well, in the political sector or in the finance sector you also have many forms of corruption, but in sports sector I see a number of specificities, and when combined together it makes you understand how complex it can be for law enforcement to sanction, investigate such forms of corruption. Just a few of them I want to mention. The fact that the sports sector is very transnational in nature. The transfer system, the championships, the sports events like the Olympic Games draw participations from all the countries of the world. And you also have behind a lot of economic and political interest. We know about sports diplomacies, how important it can be for states to receive a number of medals at the games, or to host the World Cups, to host major championships. And so that also attracts a number of risk factors for sports. I also mentioned already the regulation of sports, very specific at international level in particular. The autonomy that is sought by the sports organizations makes it in the end more fragile, more vulnerable to outside sports or inside sports corruption. And again, all the betting activity around sports, all the economic investment makes it again very vulnerable to sports corruption. So I'm not describing all the risk factors, but just to show you that there are many, that are complex and multifaceted, and that you have to take that into account when you think about how to improve the framework against corruption in sports. I'm sure that in the next 2 days, you will go through these different items. Second part, just to mention two major standards and norms that are quite recent and that can be used by states, also by private sports organizations to improve the framework against corruption in sports. The first one is the United Nations Convention Against Corruption, which became active in 2005. It's the only universal, legally binding instrument against corruption. It draws 188 parties today. It covers the whole framework of anti-corruption, the prevention, the law enforcement capacities, the criminalization, the cooperation, the assistance between countries and between services, the exchange of information. It does not define corruption as such, which is very difficult. As you say, as you know, there is no universal definition of corruption, but it does define specific acts of corruption that are established as criminal offenses or should be established as criminal offenses according to this convention. Bribery, embezzlement, trading in influence, concealment and laundering of proceeds of corruption. This is the really the mandatory provisions that make this instrument very far-reaching and quite useful in the approach on sports corruption. This convention does not mention sports as such, but the state parties, the Conference of the State Parties, adopted two resolutions over the last years. Again, it's a sign and indicator that the forms of sports corruption are developing and are starting to raise the alarm across public authorities. Two resolutions which sought on how to apply this convention on the sports sector. Here I list a number of possibilities um, of, um, of applying this convention. The fact, for example, that states can coordinate policies and evaluate policies targeting anti-corruption in sports. This is something that a number of countries now have been doing, especially the countries where you have a specific anti-corruption entity that are now conducting some risk assessment and also coordinating some policies on anti-corruption at national level. France has been doing that because, especially because of the Olympic Games that are being prepared for the since 2017. So the anti-corruption agency in France has been coordinating an anti-corruption policy for sports. So this is just an example. But also parties can invite sports organizations to improve their governance, their transparency, their accountability, the standards of conduct regarding, let's say, conflicts of interest, regarding the detection, the protection of whistleblowers that are talking about or speaking up about corruption. The convention can also be used to improve the procurement aspects in the preparation of sports events. Many public markets, the awarding of contracts for the construction, for the management of sports infrastructure are subject to corruption practices, as you have seen in the many last Olympic Games in Brazil, in Japan, or in other countries. So again, you can use the convention to improve the transparency of the process and to make sure that objective criteria are used to award such important contracts. Because sports involve so many stakeholders, private stakeholders like athletes, staff, clubs, fans. The convention also invites, and resolutions from the Conference of the State Parties can invite sports organizations to involve more closely the fans, the athletes, all the end users of sports competitions and activities into the decision-making process and also the accountability of the whole process of sports governance to make sure that it's transparent and that all the stakeholders have a say, or at least have a view on what is going on within sports organizations. The sports sector also has its own private justice system in the form of disciplinary bodies and a disciplinary framework. So it's a privately enforced network. So again, the convention parties can make sure that this disciplinary sector, the disciplinary um, uh, I would say justice within sport, the sport system um, respects a number of universal principles regarding justice delivery. The rights of the parties, the hearings, the transparency, the speed of the process. These are aspects that can be improved within the sports sector. And lastly, the anti-corruption training regarding law enforcement with concerns the sports sector. Many law enforcement today don't know much about betting, how it works. They don't know much about the transfer systems. They don't know much about how clubs finances are organized at a transnational level. So there's space to train, raise awareness within the law enforcement bodies, but also within sports organizations, private sports organizations that can also be trained to better understand the forms of sports corruption and the good practices to counter it, and any advice on how to improve the current framework. The Council of Europe Convention is the second convention I want to mention because it's the only convention today dealing with the manipulation of sports competitions. As I've already said, the subject of manipulation can cover many aspects, but the work of this convention of the parties of the national platforms has been really targeting the betting related forms of manipulations. The convention is quite important because it defines manipulation. I've already mentioned this definition, but it also defines illegal betting. The fact that betting should be considered illegal according to the jurisdiction of the consumer and not the jurisdiction of the betting operator. Meaning that today, if you are a betting operator that are based in a jurisdiction in the Philippines, in an economic zone in I don't know in Singapore or in Curacao or in Malta, but you are targeting consumers from all around the world. This is forms of illegal betting, and the convention has been quite historic in underlining the illegal nature actually of most of the betting activity today, and this is a major concern in terms of regulation. The convention also invites parties to encourage sports organizations to implement a number of measures to fight against manipulation, some measures with regard to betting regulation, and it's also invite parties to establish national platforms that attract private and public entities, so sports federations, betting operators, betting regulators, law enforcement, ministries in charge of sports. And the national platforms serve as a hub at national level to coordinate the fight against manipulation, but also at international level to have forms of cooperation between jurisdictions. The convention does not criminalize manipulation, but ask parties to make sure that their penal codes are adapted to the sanctioning of manipulation. Today, this 45 states have signed and ratified this convention. No, sorry, excuse me, 9 ratifications and 41 signatures, excuse me. The convention is open to non-Council of Europe countries, which makes it quite possible that it becomes universal one day. A number of countries like Australia, Morocco, Japan are currently negotiating to enter and to ratify this convention. The EU signing process is also in the process in ongoing. It takes a number of time since a number of political discussion were surrounding this convention, and especially the definition of illegal betting, which pose a problem to some jurisdictions. And today we have the secretariat of the convention and a follow-up committee that is working on developing the national platforms and the group of Copenhagen, which is a network of the national platforms to make sure that when cases are detected, when investigations are going on, that all the national platforms that are parties to the convention cooperate, exchange information. As I've said, the betting related forms of manipulation are very much transnational, and it requires the cooperation of many law enforcement entities. And I mentioned very briefly that beyond the public standards, the conventions against corruption, private sports organizations have also, for the last 20 years, developed a framework, compliance framework, a classical compliance framework, uh, adapting their regulation, their disciplinary regulation to forms of corruption, doing some prevention and awareness work, opening reporting mechanisms to detect and monitoring mechanism to detect manipulation and corruption, and also opening integrity units to investigate such cases. I wanted to mention it quite quickly because it's again we also often forget about such developments today in the private sports sector. I will, for the remaining minutes, I will mention the role and protection of whistleblowers, which is also a specificity of sports. As I've said, it has been the subject of my PhD a couple of years ago. And you know, or maybe you don't know, but all the major cases today of sports corruption, of doping, manipulation are reported by sports whistleblowers. In the Lance Armstrong case, in the Russian doping saga, which is still ongoing now since 2015, so almost 10 years. So many procedures again, criminal, private disciplinary procedures are ongoing today around this doping within Russian sports. This saga has been triggered by whistleblowers, as you can see on the left, Rodchenkov and Stepanova. Um, but actually, sports whistleblowers are quite rare because all of these cases of sports whistleblowers have faced reprisals, ostracism, end of their career, and sometimes some physical threats. The Russian whistleblowers are now living hidden in North America because of the threats. Some deaths have been also repatriated in Russia around this Russian doping whistleblowing. So it's a very sensitive subject to blow the whistle on sports corruption because, as I said, it carries so much economic and political weight behind. Um, but in the end, private sports organizations today are really struggling to get information on forms of corruption and manipulation because today they depend on such human intelligence to start and to continue and to finish their investigations. It's very difficult, like in other sectors, you can say, to detect corruption and to also because you sometimes you have no victim behind such cases, so it's very difficult to monitor and to detect corruption. So you need to have whistleblowers, reporting persons to come up with information. And what we can see today is that the sports culture is very much against whistleblowing, focused so much on performance. The athletes are, since they are 5 years old, trained to perform and not very much trained on ethical issues. The team and club loyalty is so strong that it's so difficult for an athlete today to go against his or her club president, to go against his or her coach or club captain. And we see my scientific publications underline that you have a very strong moral disengagement within sports. Athletes, but also sports officials are very much um, uh, disengaging from any moral thinking around sports activities. So when someone comes and bribe them or try to bribe them, it's very difficult for them to identify the moral dimension of the bribe and to refuse it. And also, again, to report it if you even if you refuse it. Sports organizations have opened many reporting mechanisms to attract information, human intelligence on manipulations and corruption. I go quite quickly. I'm sorry, just to leave you with some space for the questions. But the results are quite poor. Very few alerts or substantial alerts are coming to sports organizations. because in many contexts, in many sporting contexts, like I said, you can have a specific regulation in place and have a reporting mechanism. But if you don't have the ethical culture, if you don't have the leadership commitment to protect whistleblowers, on sports corruption, but also, as you have heard, about harassment and abuse, violence within sports or doping, you won't have people taking risk and risking to end their career, standing up and providing information on illegal activities in sports. I conclude with a number of public frameworks today that could maybe propose some solutions. A number of countries now are imposing whistleblower protection legislation, especially with the EU and whistleblower protection directive. However, in many countries, most of the countries actually, such legislation does not really apply to sports. Because the legislation often concern employer-employee relations, and many sports stakeholders are not employed by their entities. Also, the protection regimes, for example, of witness protection, are not very much applied to sports where everything goes so fast. And because sports investigations are also very much mediatized, you have many cases of information becoming public. So it's very difficult again to protect the confidentiality and anonymity of sports whistleblowers. So that's why very few sports whistleblowers have managed to stay anonymous and or have their identity kept confidentially. And that's why very often the public protection regimes regarding whistleblowers do not really apply. One solution I could underline is the fact that the national platforms are developing today against manipulation and corruption, and they could, because there are not only private organizations inside, but also public sector organizations, maybe they can be more credible to sports stakeholders and attract more whistleblowers. One example is the Sports Integrity Australia, an agency dedicated on sports integrity, and it's a public agency, and it has a whistleblower protection regime that has been developed over the last months. It's very new, but for me, and when I discuss with sports organizations, I often promote this example. It's an example of national framework involving public and private organizations around sports that can propose far-reaching and more protective and more credible whistleblower education and protection approach to the sports sector. So it's for me one of the good practices that can be promoted at international level. I'm sorry I was so fast. My agenda was really tight. If you have any question, please don't hesitate to address them. You have my email address as well if you have further questions later on in the next days. I don't know. Please, I'm open to any question, but also any experience, any opinion on such a complex, sensitive aspect of sports corruption. Thank you very much.